Physics has a problem it has not yet solved. Not for lack of trying. For 100 years, the greatest minds in physics have run into the same wall. Every time you measure a quantum system, something must do the measuring. But that measuring instrument is also made of quantum particles, so something must measure the measurer, which is also made of quantum particles, so something must measure that. The chain never ends. In 1961, a Nobel laureate named Eugene Wigner published an essay on this exact problem. Wigner proposed a conclusion that many physicists rejected. The chain ends at consciousness. Wigner argued that consciousness might occupy a unique role in the measurement process. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, Krishna makes a precise distinction to Arjuna on the battlefield. He calls it Kshetra and Kshetrajna, the field, and the knower of the field. Kshetra is everything that can be measured. Kshetrajna is that which measures, and it is never itself measurable. A structure resembling Wigner's problem appears in the Gita, in a different language, 2,000 years earlier. In the 3rd century CE, a philosopher in Alexandria came to a remarkably similar boundary from a completely different direction. He described the observer as the one thing that cannot observe itself. 3 investigations, 2,000 years apart, 1 problem. This video maps all 3. The measurement problem begins with what quantum mechanics says about physical systems before they are observed. In the standard Copenhagen description, a system before measurement may be described as existing in superposition, no definite position, no definite momentum, no definite spin. In the Copenhagen framework, measurement yields a single outcome. The wave function is treated as collapsed. The particle has a definite value. This works perfectly in the laboratory. The problem arrives when you ask, what exactly caused the collapse? The obvious answer: the measuring instrument, the detector, the photon counter, the screen. But the detector is also made of atoms. Atoms obey quantum mechanics. Before it interacts with the particle, the detector is also in superposition. So something must collapse the detector. The laboratory, the physicist's eye, the physicist's brain, the physicist's nervous system. All made of quantum particles, all in principle describable by the Schrödinger equation. You can always expand the system to include the observer. But then you need another observer outside that larger system. Imagine a camera filming another camera. Both cameras film each other. At what point in that chain does the recording begin? That is the measurement problem. It has remained a subject of debate since the early development of quantum theory. Werner Heisenberg identified it at Solvay. Niels Bohr worked around it. Neither solved it. In 1961, Eugene Wigner published Remarks on the Mind-Body Question in a volume called The Scientist Speculates. Wigner was not a fringe thinker. He would win the Nobel Prize in Physics 2 years later, in 1963, for his work on nuclear symmetry. His essay was precise and careful. He introduced a thought experiment. He called it Wigner's Friend. Imagine a physicist, Wigner's friend, sealed inside a laboratory. The friend measures a quantum system, gets a definite result. From inside the lab, collapse has occurred. The measurement is complete. But from outside the lab, from Wigner's perspective, the friend and the quantum system together are still in superposition. Wigner has not yet received any information. From his perspective, nothing has collapsed. The thought experiment creates a tension between 2 descriptions that quantum theory appears to allow. Wigner proposed, Collapse may occur at the point where consciousness receives the information. Not at the detector, not at the physicist's eye, at the knowing. If Wigner is right, consciousness occupies a role unlike anything else in physics. His precise statement, from the 1961 essay, "It is not possible to formulate the laws of quantum mechanics in a fully consistent way without reference to consciousness. The knower cannot be included in what is known." Before the ancient parallel, the mainstream objection must be stated. Most physicists reject Wigner's conclusion. The Copenhagen interpretation requires only an irreversible interaction with a macroscopic measuring device. No consciousness needed. Carlo Rovelli's relational quantum mechanics goes further. Collapse is relative to each observer. No privileged observer exists. No consciousness required. Decoherence theory explains why quantum superpositions become classical through interaction with the environment. Again, no consciousness needed. Wigner's position is a minority view within professional physics. The Bhagavad Gita does not rescue Wigner's physics. It does not confirm the consciousness collapse view. What it does is something more precise. It identifies a structural parallel to Wigner's problem. It names what stands at the top of the chain. Two instruments. Possibly similar territory. Before the Gita's answer, test this directly for 20 seconds. Whatever thoughts are present right now, something is aware of those thoughts. That awareness is not itself a thought, it watches the thoughts. Can you find that awareness in the thoughts, or does it always remain just outside them? That is exactly the problem Wigner spent his career describing. In Chapter 13, Krishna responds to Arjuna's most direct question. What is the field, and who is the knower of the field? Krishna's answer, from verses 13.1 and 13.2, paraphrased from the translation by Gambhirananda. This body is called the field. The one who knows this field, the wise call that one the knower of the field. Krishna then expands the field far beyond the body. Thoughts, emotions, senses, memory, desire, aversion. Even the sense of I is part of Kshetra. Everything that can appear and experience. Everything that can be described. That is Kshetra. And Kshetrajna? Krishna describes it in verse 13.22. The knower of the field is said to be the witness, the consenter, the sustainer, the experiencer, the great Lord. It is Brahman, it is consciousness itself, and it is never itself an object of the field. Now map this to Wigner's problem. Wigner's expanding chain includes everything that can be described by the Schrödinger equation: the particle, the detector, the laboratory, the physicist's brain, the physicist's nervous system. That is Kshetra. Wigner proposed. The chain ends at the one thing that cannot be included in the system: the conscious observer. That is Kshetrajna. The field cannot know itself. The knower of the field cannot be contained in the field. Wigner arrived there through quantum mechanics. The Gita had explored a remarkably similar distinction 2,500 years earlier, through direct investigation. The Bhagavad Gita mapped the structure from inside the Vedic tradition. Kshetrajna is described through its properties: witness, sustainer, consenter. But the tradition does not stop there. It asks the harder question: can the knower know itself? In the 3rd century CE, a philosopher in Alexandria came to a remarkably similar boundary from a completely different direction. He was not reading the Gita. There is no evidence that Plotinus drew this idea from the Bhagavad Gita, and he described the observer with a precision that resembles aspects of Kshetrajna. Plotinus wrote the Enneads in the 3rd century CE. In Ennead v. 3.1, he addresses the question of self-knowledge directly. Can the highest principle, which he calls the One, know itself? His answer, paraphrased from the Armstrong translation: the One does not see itself. To see would require a separation between the seer and the seen. The One has no such separation. It is not the seeing of something. It is the seeing itself. This is not mystical poetry. It is precise philosophy. The observer cannot observe itself because observation requires a gap between the subject and the object. Kshetrajna cannot be Kshetra. The knower cannot become the field. The observer cannot be observed. Plotinus, approaching from Greek philosophy, arrived at a structurally similar problem. 3 traditions, 3 methods, 1 structural conclusion. Wigner called it the point where the chain ends. Krishna called it Kshetrajna. Plotinus called it the one that cannot see itself. 3 different languages, 3 different centuries, 1 recurring pattern. Each tradition draws a distinction between what can appear in experience and the standpoint from which experience occurs. Physics has not resolved what occupies that standpoint. The Gita and Plotinus did not claim to measure it. They named it, and they found the same name. The Gita's method is not philosophical analysis. It is direct investigation. Krishna does not ask Arjuna to believe this. He asks him to see it. Test this directly, not as philosophy, as a direct observation. Right now, there is awareness present. Notice any thought that is currently arising. It might be about this video. It might be about something else entirely. Now notice. Something is aware of that thought. Is that awareness itself a thought? Or does it remain just outside the thought, watching it, without being it? Every time you look for the awareness, you find more content, more thoughts, more sensations, more kshetra. But what is doing the looking? That, whatever is doing the looking, is what Wigner could not include in his equations, what Krishna called Kshetrajna, what Plotinus called the one that cannot see itself. Physics calls it the hard problem of consciousness. The Gita called it the knower of the field. Plotinus called it the unseen seer. 3 names, 1 recognition. Eugene Wigner ran into the wall in 1961. On the other side of that wall, the Bhagavad Gita had explored a remarkably similar distinction. And Plotinus had arrived there independently, from a different continent, through a different method, 17 centuries before Wigner was born. 2 instruments. 1 recurring pattern. Ancient wisdom. Quantum mystery. Direct knowing. If the direct investigation landed, the next video maps what happens when the knower is the only thing left. It is on your screen now and in the description.